out in this country, and we have discussed in the past repeatedly, we have an ad hoc import-export policy when it comes to agri-foods, which is a key cornerstone of any inflation bucket. In that sense, the government would ensure that Jan, Feb, March is this quarter in the calendar becomes the most important piece for them in terms of keeping inflation at its lowest and making a political statement.
Okay,
and then growth can follow.
Making a political statement by taming inflation tree, and we'll come to the export of agri products maybe subsequently, time permitting. But I want to really understand that inflation, of course, is something that bites everybody. It bites the vote bank, it bites the elite, it bites pretty much everybody. It hurts them in different measures, but it bites everybody. Now, the fear really still stems from the fact that RBI has done whatever it could by way of rate hikes, cycle after cycle, month after month, and then of course there's been a pause for the last 5 months, 6 months or so. But apart from that, if the monetary policy has done whatever it can to tame inflation, is there any levers available in the fiscal policy to tame inflation? And I believe subsidizing is not the way forward.
So, Kartik, I think first of all, let's give RBI a round of applause for having done a great job so far. Because all said and done, inflation is still within its comfort zone of 6%, right? So I think there is still some headroom to my mind for monetary policy to come in and act. But I think we'll take a lot of our cues from what happens in the US. We've seen the US Fed hold its rates and the promises that we're not going to increase rates. But that could change next year. Depending on how things pan out. If the US economy becomes hotter and prices start to go up again, I think US Fed will have no choice but to start increasing interest rates. So in which case India will have no choice but to follow suit, because we can't allow the arbitrage between their interest rate and ours to be too high, because then the outflow will happen of currency, US dollars from here. But coming to fiscal, I think Rakesh mentioned on why inflation will be an important issue next year. I think we have to protect farmers next year. So there will be, I think, some focus on farm subsidies. It's not for no reason that the Prime Minister has already talked about that he believes in only 4 kind of classes in India, including farmers, apart from women, youth and,
OBCs,
the poor people. So he has given an indication. So I think if the government had to err on the side of caution, they would stamp out inflation, even if it means that for, let's say, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, we have to deal with lower growth. So that's a no-brainer.
But Rakesh, can we afford these subsidies? Can we afford these dishing out of, let's say, the free ration, cutting down of LPG prices? All of these, when you're unable to tame inflation, you want to keep more money in the hands of people one way or another. I understand election year, but for the next, let's say, 5 years that the free ration scheme is going to be on for, can India afford it?
No, not at all. I think it's a bad decision, and I have come on record to say that, announcing a decision 5 years to go forward, and it's a free ration when we are saying that 80 crore people will get free ration for the next 5 years. It's retrograde in many ways. It might win elections, it might win votes, but from the political economy perspective, it inhibits, it debilitates the original capability of that citizen to stand on his or her own feet. It's a crutch, let's face it. So I am not for subsidies. There is need for targeted subsidies. This government has made virtue of that. But beyond that, if you really spread it thin, and what's happening is that it's a fiscal virus, which is spreading, across states. And we have seen what has happened in our neighborhood. If we don't learn from the capability of the fiscal virus to truly, kill your growth story, then we are headed for bad times, even if we have a very stable and strong government.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to add to what Rakesh is saying, Kartik, I mean, there's good subsidy, there's good SOPs, and there are bad SOPs. And unfortunately, the kind of SOPs we're seeing now increasingly in this whole political game where the parties want to, win state elections, what we've seen is that they are unnecessarily expanding the scope of SOPs to things people really don't need. For example, do women really need free bus rides? Do middle-class households need subsidized electricity?
Not at all.
So these are all. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So there's a moral hazard, as Rakesh pointed out, to what is basically inbuilt in these SOPs. It stops people from aspiring for better, from going out and finding workers. Youth who's going to be getting, SOPs for not working for, let's say, X amount of months, we'll say, okay, how does it matter if I don't look for a job for, 3 months or 6 months?
Right. So I think the next debate
and
really that
learning,
emerges
Kartik,
is...
Chidambaram, way back, in 2007 or 8, did this massive farmer, subsidy. It was one time. There is no audit of whether actually it brought about any change in the lives of people. The only difference now in the regime of subsidies is this Labharthi politics, where there's a targeted, perspective, which is auditable, but all other SOPs, as she rightly pointed out, fall in an open bucket where there's no audit, there is no outcome orientation in terms of identifying whether actually people have gained or not, or they continue to, so-called benefit within quotes from this large.
But there's a counterpoint to that, Sri, and since you mentioned, this balance between government giving more money in the hands of people who may or may not need it, the fact that India's GDP is still about 57% or so consumption driven. So more money in the hands of people by SOPs or otherwise ensures that they're going out and buying more of things that they either need or they want. So overall, isn't that in any case good news for the economy?
No, absolutely. So money in the hands of the needy, the one who really needs, the one who's struggling to eat. Great idea. That's why we have direct benefit, transfer. The schemes that are happening, and which has effectively transferred, made sure there are no leakages in the subsidies that are being given out. So that is absolutely important, because India is a poor country. We have millions of people who are still struggling to make a living every day. Absolutely no problem with that. I think the larger issue which both Rakesh and I are trying to make is that the needless subsidies, this is like a race to the bottom in terms of how much more can I push my state into some sort of a fiscal rabbit hole from which it's going to be impossible for me to come out. So that is a dangerous route, Kartik. I think that's the one we should avoid.
Right. Okay. So I think let's leave elections and election-based economics aside for now, and let's look at the macro picture and take like a 35,000 feet view on, let's say, what is happening in the US and how that could, transpire into India's growth or India's sort of pressure when it comes to not just the fiscal prudence, but even the current account. So I think a couple of challenges. Every economist out there is hoping for a soft landing. I think the fears of hard landing, crash landing, recession have been kept aside by most economists right now. But we've also seen at the same time, we've seen great momentum in gold, for example, and India continues to be an importer of gold. Huge. At the same time, with two wars on Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, and God alone knows how long those wars are going to last, there has been pressure on oil. There are talks of OPEC wanting to cut oil production to keep prices stable, as they call it, but that won't work in favor of us. So overall, the way the entire macroeconomy globally is moving with all these uncertainties, what is the impact on India, Sri?
So I think that is the key risk, Kartik, because if you look at the Indian economy per se, I think we are on a very strong footing. I think the reforms that have happened over the last 10 years, whether it's in the infrastructure investment, whether it is GST, whether it is digitization or anything else that we've done, I think we put the underpinnings of the Indian economy are far stronger today than they were 10 years ago. So I'm not too worried about the Indian economy per se. Okay. But these are the global factors. We started off this discussion by talking about inflation. So that's exactly what the problem is. Tomorrow, let's say if there is supply chain disruption, or if this Ukraine and Russia war spirals out of control, or the Hamas does something which is dramatic. So we could see we could be in a totally different world altogether. It will just take like one incident to change our world upside down. So that, to my mind, is the biggest risk India faces from a 2024 perspective.
So absolutely. I mean, the Hamas war escalating from that very limited corridor to corridors where oil is being, transported. And that's in the neighborhood.
But
so far it has not happened.
But what we've seen is, Rakesh, that oil prices have more or less remained stable. While we saw a spike, but that was only early days of war.
Because now you have one big engine, which is China, grappling with a slowdown. Okay, then we have US. It's also like it's growing strongly, but the sentiment is that, Fed is waiting to push the US economy into some sort of recessionary, mode, so that, it doesn't have to increase the interest rates. So that sentiment is playing on the oil market. So, which is why you're seeing that the oil prices are still stable, despite all these factors that are war going on in two different places. So, if oil is still holding, it's because of this.
And also the global consumption story is pretty weak. It's dismal in comparison to the Indian consumption. So
which is also, of course, playing out on India's own export story. But we'll hold that thought, Rakesh.
India's
we'll come to that
story, at the interest rates that you were mentioning about RBI stance, at that rate, the housing loan pickup has been phenomenal in the last, 12 to 18 months. So, there is
huge rebound in real estate market in the last 8 years.
Yeah, when it was at the lowest, it didn't
And
have...
even look at car sales for that matter.
Every
month on
category,
month.
mobile phones, cars, housing, there is an upbeat, there is an uptrend, which is,
Right. But since Sri mentioned China, I just want to come back to China for a minute or two. And there are new projections that came out about 2 weeks ago or so, which are suggesting right now that, and in fact, the World Bank around around December 14th or 15th had come out with this report suggesting that China's growth is actually going to slow down even further, and it has cut down China's growth forecast for FY24 to 4.5% and FY25 to 4.3%. So now in this overall China slowing down story, up until now, apart from perhaps smartphone manufacturing, India hasn't really been able to seize the China plus one opportunity. Do you see with China's momentum continuing to slow, at least for the next 1.5 years, until new projections come, either in sync or contrary to what we've seen? Do you think this is going to be the year for India to seize the China plus one opportunity?
Oh, 100%, without doubt. But the direct benefit that India will gain, Kartik, as China slows down, will be from the commodities market. Don't forget that China is the largest consumer of just about every commodity that you can think of, whether it's steel, copper, oil, whatever. It's the largest consumer of everything. So the moment a large buyer like China steps out of the market or says, okay, I'm going to reduce my consumption, prices go down. And that's going to help India. And that's going to help our economy and keep the inflation down. So, will the other investors follow this cue? Obviously, they're going to come because we've already seen the shift happening away from China, whether it's Europe or US. So I think India will benefit from this. We need to see more automobile manufacturing coming, especially EV. I think that's going to come to India. So apart from batteries, I think, and semiconductors going to come in. That's a big push that's happening. So we'll see a bunch of new industry which emerge starting next year, whether it's in green industry, it's in EV, or something else. So it's going to happen in a very big way.
So talking about semiconductors, Rakesh,
before I come to semiconductors, I think the very important point to realize is that first on the forecast with the most esteemed organizations globally, they predicted in January 23 that India and China would drive 50% of the world growth. We've gone horribly wrong on that. That India doing well, but China not doing well. Then they predicted recession in US, which didn't happen. So I'm not too cognizant of the World Bank estimates. They went wrong on India's
China will still do about 5%.
I think the number can be questioned, but the trend is more or less.
Because China is not doing well; it's imploding. That's right. So, but so I would categorize this China plus one as an aspiration as of now. I have been very consistent with this. We can go to and do some headline management, but the truth of the matter is that we are not yet ready. We have to do that prep, which is significant. There is a goal right ahead. China is not doing well, which helps us. But beyond that, what have we done? There is a policy enunciation in terms of the PLI, offtake.
Make in India talks about 25% of your GDP coming from manufacturing.
Yeah, but at the back end, you have to create that enabling environment. It's not happening. Manufacturing needs land. There is no clarity on the land policy. So I would expect the new government, whichever it is, Modi government or non-Modi government, to truly take that decision. If you don't do it in the 10th year or the 11th year, when do you do it?
But I want to talk to you about something that you really enjoy talking about. So I want to give you, on the first day of the new year, I want to give you that comfort, Rakesh. There are states which perform much better on manufacturing than states, that are laggards when it comes to manufacturing. And do you think this change, land acquisition, needs to be driven at every state's own level? Does there need to be a central policy around it? Why is it that we see a lot of manufacturing activity in small pockets in Gujarat, in Tamil Nadu, a little bit in Karnataka and the Karnataka-Tamil Nadu border, Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh? What is it that these states have done right? Is it just favorable policies at the state government level? Because if these were easy to replicate, why wouldn't other states open up to manufacturing?
Very valid question. I think you looked at it from a very completely fresh perspective. Is there need for a central template, or is there a need for a decentralized template where we learn from the best practices of the states that you mentioned? I think there is no going away from a central template, because when you are a big investor, you need to look at what is the central policy, because there are correlations. Yet, there is a learning from these states which needs to be transported. But land is essentially ultimately in the hands of the people who are running that state. The central template will make it easy from the perspective of continuity. See, this
or even a single window clearance and stuff
no,
like that.
in terms of continuity, we have seen
we saw, I think SEZs were a buzzword 10 years, 15 years ago. What happened to them?
The Singur example, hurts all of us even today. There might have been political, opportunism or political reinvention as you look at it from your own political perspective. But it hurts, and then the retrograde takes, all global investors look at land as a key component, but they also look at continuity in policy.
Yeah.
So that central template will bring in that continuity. Even if the state turns a blind eye to you one day, doesn't like you. And then, we have seen what happened with the Vedanta plant,
Of course.
in
and the falling out of Vedanta and Foxconn when it came to semiconductors.
Absolutely. So in that sense, a central template plus one, that is the state government in this case.
Okay, so let's bring this discussion back to, since we are talking about manufacturing, I think what is going to be imperative for India's own Atmanirbharta, self-reliance in manufacturing is going to be make in India, make in India for electronics, the bedrock of electronics being the semiconductors. And we haven't faced much success. Some promises of US investments coming into Gujarat, Allied Materials, etc. They want to set up their plants. Micron is already, it has broken the ground and is setting up its plant. But since we are talking international geopolitics also, Taiwan goes into elections again this year. There is a semiconductor artificial intelligence war between US and China right now. So these three, US versus China, a regime change perhaps in US and a continuity stroke regime change in Taiwan, is that going to be beneficial or is that going to be catastrophic for India's semiconductor dreams, Sri?
No, I think it's going to be beneficial. I'll tell you why. Because the moment you have the traditional supply chains, the sources of markets facing any kind of problem, people will look for an alternative base to be developed. So like we talked earlier about China, like OnePlus, kind of a model for manufacturers. That's applicable to the semiconductor industry as well. And Taiwanese semiconductor company itself wants to build newer bases because they don't know what's going to happen in Taiwan because they have this constant uncertainty which is hanging over their head from China. So it's in their own interest to diversify and come into a more stable kind of a political and macroeconomic climate where they can operate. And here is a government which is laying out the red carpet for these people. So I think we will see definite investment coming into semiconductor.
I would imagine even the government of India has to be a little more proactive.
Absolutely.
So there is a front end. If you recognize Taiwan, that there are going to be geopolitical official challenges. But at the back end, I think there is need to work overtime to try and control that piece of narrative and that piece of business. Because I don't think we have done that yet to the extent it's required. So independent of what US does in Taiwan or what China does with Taiwan, we have a role to play and we know that
so
they
I think
control.
the bigger constraint, why to make the story convincing, it goes back to the same thing. We need land acquisition, we need water, uninterrupted water, uninterrupted power. And
skilled
all
labor.
These infrastructure.
I would suggest
skilled labor and also labor reforms. And labor reforms in that sense.
Are we preparing ourselves for that? Because we are, the PLI takeoff has been very dismal. 1.97 lakh crore rupees allocated across 14 sectors for PLI offtake. In the semiconductor space, we've hardly seen one or two companies. In the smartphone manufacturing, we've only seen 2 Indian companies qualify. In fact, 5 had qualified at the application stage, but only 2 companies, including Dixon and one more, have been able to meet that minimum production, after which they can receive that incentive. So as corporate India, are we moving in the right direction to skill enough people to have a long enough order book to service the kind of demand that we're talking about?
Corporate India's role is obviously in the laggard category, unfortunately. Despite a nudge, despite corporate tax cut, and then, there's this ability to, always keep, mujhe ye chahiye aur, give me more, and what do I do in return? I think there's a deficit there.
So skill training, I think it's a huge missing piece for the country. And the fact that we keep talking about a demographic dividend, and one of the things we keep selling to the world is also the fact that ample supply of labor, like median age of 28 in this country. So, but is this labor skilled enough to work in high-tech industries? Or is it skilled enough to work in engineering industry is a big question. And we have to demonstrate that to the world. That there is a program which is skilling these people.
That is the preparation I was talking about. That preparation hasn't happened.
So since you're talking about skilled labor, since you're talking about engineering, I think one sector we have to touch upon before we end this show is IT. And there were reports initially that were suggesting, and we've seen the kind of layoffs in 2023. And let's hope that story doesn't continue in 2024. But the problems that led to the 2023 layoffs are likely to stay even in 2024, and we're talking about the discretionary spending by US companies in a high interest rate regime, and many reports indicating that 2025 FY25 could be a washout year for Indian IT. So what do we do about that?
So there's, apart from the economic problems that the major markets are going to face, US, Europe, I think there's a more fundamental transformation that's happening in the IT industry, which they're grappling with right now, which is of codes getting automated. You don't need an army of 100,000 people writing codes when a machine can do it, and the machine is doing high-level coding. So what do you do with these young engineers that you hired from different places, train them to write simple code? So those jobs are going to go, Kartik. Unfortunately, that's the unfortunate reality. So unless we are able to redeploy these people, upskill them to do something which is more value added, there is going to be a crisis in the IT industry, which is why we are looking at a market not really getting enthused about IT stocks even next year.
Yeah, and also I think from the business development perspective, there's a comfort zone that the IT sector in India has gone about. There's a decadal growth perspective, however modest, but they're on a certain trajectory. They have to challenge themselves. They have to reimagine themselves. They have to target businesses which are not just good to have, but must to have. When you are in that must-have category in the global environment, you will have a secured business far more secure than good to have. The good to have will be knocked off right away.
Rakesh, a great example of that could be a company, an IT company called KPIT that runs out of Pune, which has actually diversified from IT services to actually producing and now testing sodium-ion batteries. So going all the way, pivoting from pure play IT services to something as diverse as chemistry cells. But I think that is a separate debate altogether when we talk about electric vehicles.
Because if you're an Infosys or a TCS or a Wipro,
how do you do
for
that?
you to make that
but
pivot
a company like Tata Tech, a company like Tata Technologies, I think it is well poised to actually take those leaps.
But you have to come out of the comfort zone, whether you're a Tata or you're an Infosys. There is a certain complacency that is set.
So you have to make the pivot that's appropriate to your business and your situation.
Sure, but I think since we are talking about IT and IT export services, exports has been an India story for as long as I remember. At least I joined the workforce 20 years back, and the only India export story that I've been familiar with has been the India IT export story.
Absolutely.
Now there was another export story which was on the right track but has again gone into rough weather, and I'm talking about the rough stones, the diamond industry. So are we likely to see, assuming that the wars are going to continue, assuming that US economy is going to be in the medium-ish landing, either soft or hard as the case may be, and assuming that that China is also going to go down, India's own diamond industry, which has been a positive export story, is continuing to lose its sheen, Sri.
Absolutely. So again, that's another example of industry that's been disrupted by lab-grown diamonds, because the market dynamics have changed completely now, because you can produce in the lab what De Beers sells you for 10x the price. So if that's the case, people are losing faith in diamond as an investment. So it will probably continue to be a fashion accessory, no doubt about it. Women love diamonds, men love diamonds.
But it's not going to be a precious stone anymore.
It's not going to be that precious stone anymore.
Right.
Because if you can create it in the lab at 1/10 the price,
that's right.
My investment is depreciated already if I have diamonds in my pocket.
At the macro level, Kartik, we have failed despite some very bright minds. We have this Chidambarams of the world, Montecs of the world, and now Piyush Goyals, Jaitlis. We have failed decadally to reimagine our export basket.
Right.
We are so much dependent on these 2-3 categories. So we have to reimagine it, find areas, find territories, find those must-have categories to target. That's where I started off by agri exports. The agri processing exports, there is no clarity on what the policy is.
Right.
We halt exports or hold them to for a period and then reimagine it, restart it, and the exporter, whose entire business model is left to the mercy of a babu in the Commerce Ministry.
Right. Well, we've completely run out of time, but before I let both of you go, we are about less than a month for the budget. It's going to be an interim budget, but if something were to come out of it, if you would want something to come out of it, I'll just take one take from both of you. What is the one thing that Finance Nirmala Sitharaman should deliver on 1st of February, Rakesh?
What she should deliver, what she will actually deliver, there is a difference. To my mind, she'll only deliver sops.
Only deliver sops. Okay. Shri?
So, this is of course the general election year, but I still think there will be something for the Aam Aadmi, and Rakesh said sops for the larger people. This is, realism at the end of it, Kartik. It's good to say it's a vote on account budget and all that. In July, we'll have the final budget. But the fact is, India is still a very poor country, and every budget, whether you like it or not, people always say, "Mere ko kya milega?" So I think there has to be some answer to that question.
And with this government, there is nothing interim. You know what we did in 2018. It was a full budget, by all accounts, called an interim budget.
Well, we've completely run out of time, but a lovely first edition of Business Plus here, heralding 2024. Sri, Rakesh, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to keep having you back all through the year on Business Plus. Well, with that, it's a wrap on this special edition, the 1st of Jan edition, where we are heralding 2024 at News 9 Live. Stay with us right here. Thanks for watching.
2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा।
There is certainly a wall of capital coming into the clean tech, climate tech space, not just in India.